Hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon. Hope everyone's having a good one. This is Sequence Break, a podcast that features conversations with speedrunners, developers, content creators, and everything in between. How you doing? My name's Lat Mackey, and if it's Wednesday at 6 o'clock in California or on the West Coast, then we are live. If not, maybe you're watching this on a VOD or a replay or whatever that may be. Hope you're enjoying it wherever you are. Right now, it is May 31st, and it is an unusually early time right now for GDQ to be happening, but it is. SGDQ 2023 is going on right now, literally as we're speaking, and I gotta tell you, I've been enjoying the little bit that I've had a chance to see because of it being, is it almost like a month earlier than it normally is? I haven't had a chance to watch as much as like work and stuff like that, and to be perfectly honest, this is like my first one I haven't attended in quite a long time. I think since 2017 or 18, somewhere around there. It's been a while since I haven't been there in person for SGDQ. I do miss a lot of the AGDQs because they're on the East Coast, but so as you can imagine, little bummed that I'm not there in person, but so far enjoying the runs that I've seen. I gotta tell you, there's so far up to this point, there's been a lot of like classic old school feeling runs. I was watching ADEF's Ratatouille run, and I don't know, ADEF's been on the stage for quite a long time, doing runs and stuff like that. As we're streaming live right now, Spike Vegeta is about to do a Majora's Mask randomizer. Spike's been doing runs for like ever. And coming up after that is Danger's doing Super Mario Odyssey. So a lot of times this is even, when you attend a GDQ in person or anything like that, it's kind of tough sometimes to catch like runs and watch them live. Like basically anytime whoever I've been rooming with or whatever, we'll keep it on. It's been pretty cool. GDQ actually gets like broadcast live to all the rooms and stuff. So we'll keep the stream on quite often, but how often are you in the room and how often are you watching and actually make it into the stream room? I don't know. It's just like, it's one of those tough things that, you don't get a chance to watch as much. So for me nowadays, especially the last 5 or 6 years, GDQ has been a lot about like watching the VODs afterwards and rewatching some things. Today on the podcast, I'm actually going to reshare a conversation I was very fortunate to have back in 2020, towards the end of 2020. And this is with Mike Uyama, one of the founders of GDQ, and also with Frezzy Man and Andrew G, who were runners. Mike was a runner as well, but these are some of the first runners to ever do anything on the quote unquote GDQ stage, which back then, the very first one, Classic Games Done Quick, was, a couch in Mike Uyama's mom's basement. As, the story has been told many and many a times. And we don't cover too much of that. I thought it'd be a lot more interesting to hear, like, at this point, like, what was it like from the runner's perspective? And what was speedrunning like back in 2010? And why the hell would you, fly or travel all this way to go do some speedrunning with some friends for a really good cause, for charity and things like that? And so that's what this conversation about. If you're not too familiar with Frezzy Man, he's influenced quite a bit of us who have been speedrunning for a while, and from Europe. He's from Sweden, and it was kind of interesting to hear his perspective. He literally flew over an ocean to go to the very first GDQ, and apparently there was a couple other international folks. I know Mike89 was there, who's Sega Junkie, from Australia, and I think they said there was one other person who had crossed an ocean just to get there, but everyone all the others from North America. So it's kind of an interesting conversation. It's not a very long one. I'm only sharing a short clip. But I think it'd also be kind of interesting and kind of cool to just like remember, like, what was the first thing that got you into speedrunning, or maybe what was your first experience? And for a lot of people who have appeared on this podcast, a lot of times it's a run they saw at GDQ, whether it was live streamed. And I think the first one might have been Justin TV, or was it Ustream? I can't remember. I think maybe they did Justin TV. I can't remember. My mind's a little blank at this point. But I know for me, I think the first one I might have seen, maybe the first clip I ever saw might have been a YouTube clip, but it was around like 14 or 15. And I say it quite often, but I'm going to say it again. Mitch Flower Power running Super Mario Brothers 3. And it was the first time I had seen the wrong warp, on Mario 3. And I was just like, what is this? I have no idea what's going on. It's so cool. And then one of the other ones that really hit me early on, and this one I think I may have watched live, but I can't remember, was a Zelda 2 run of ProJN and by ProJN, who is just one of the most prolific Zelda 2 speedrunners. Even to this day, his runs still are quite highly regarded, even though he hasn't been running the game in a few years. But just seeing the amount of skill demonstrated by somebody in that game really was something that stuck with me. I'm like, this is amazing. What the heck's going on? And I think the rest, is kind of history from there. Like that, all you need is one small thing to get you hooked. I know because at this point there's been like 80 something episodes of the podcast. Quite often you'll hear different, maybe it was a task that got you started. Maybe that was got you hooked. Maybe, maybe whatever, maybe your favorite game was, that was the thing that got you hooked. But quite often you'll see or hear, especially on this podcast, some sort of connection to GDQ. And it's really tough to notice and be observant of the growth of speedrunning without linking it somehow to GDQ, because as GDQ got bigger, so did the speedrunning community. And who knows what would happen had GDQ not existed, but it seems like those two are going to be intertwined kind of forever. Now, the interesting part is I think speedrunning at this point is just kind of like taking on a life of its own. I think of a game like Minecraft, which, is so prolific on YouTube and so many different places. And it's the kind of game where I'm like, man, that game seems to like have a life of its own in the speedrunning community that it probably doesn't, it is completely separate from GDQ. But I know for a lot of us, especially those of us in the retro space and who enjoy retro speedrunning, 8, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, all those kind of things. There's a lot of fond memories we probably have of GDQ, and I'm no different. One of the things that got me hooked back in the day too was I've always been a person like really interested in like charitable causes and like really good causes, and especially during the summer, we usually the two GDQs, charities they still support are Doctors Without Borders and Prevent Cancer. And my father-in-law right now is really going through it with cancer. And it's interesting how these causes that we're raising money for kind of become a bit more personal when you've got like family or somebody you care about involved at the same time. So many different, everyone's got their own reason for wanting to do speedrunning or maybe join one of these marathons or anything like that. So I was that kind of stuff kind of interesting. And I also like to see like, hey, what's your favorite run? Like so often, because there's literally at this point, there's like a week of 24/7 speedrunning. It's tough to know and to catch everything that we see on the stream. So I'm like, what was your favorite run? So, so far, or what's your favorite run going to be? I think that's always kind of interesting thing. I rely on other people to tell me what to go see. And, what's the run I should watch? There's a jam-packed lineup. It's still coming to up. I mean, for this schedule, it's been an interesting balance of like, retro speed runs, kind of classic speed runs that we might, or traditional, I should say, and some really new indie stuff and things that people may not have seen before. So kind of interested to see where this ends up, especially on, if you notice the last day on Saturday, there's still like a bunch of like, feels like very old school traditional speed runs. So I'm kind of interested to see how it ends up and what it looks like, and we'll have to see then. But as for everything else, going to share right now a clip and a conversation with Mike, Uyama, Frezzy Man, and Andrew G. And I don't think there's really anything to set up here other than we got together to chat what it was like for the very first experience and how this whole thing got started. So you'll hear a little bit at the beginning about, what the beginnings of the marathon was, but then we'll jump in pretty quickly to what it was like to be a runner at that very first one and how you got runs in and what was speed running like and just, the whole thing. So thanks everyone for being here. Hope you enjoy this little clip and enjoy a conversation about the very first GDQ. Awesome. Okay, everyone's unmuted. This is great. We are ready to go. So before we get into some of the runs and watching some of the things that we're going to be watching today, I'd like to take us all back a little bit. And Mike, I'm going to ask you to set the stage a bit and really, like, how did this idea of this charity speedrunning event even start? Where did this whole thing come about?
Well, back in 2009, there were basically two events, video game charity fundraising events, and they were Desert Bus for Hope and the Speed Gamers, who ironically were not speedrunners, but they would basically focus on a series and play through them and fundraise for charity that way. And we looked at both of these events and we're like, oh, we can do this. We want to do this. And so, being speedrunners, we're like, we can do this better because we can do this fast. It turns out that it was a lot harder than we thought it was. And I definitely respect both groups for what they do. But that was kind of where the idea came from. And now while, speedrunning, marathons, raising money for charity, it's pretty common nowadays. Back then it was, in 2009, it was unheard of.
So I've had a chance to hang out and get to meet some of the people who made the first one even possible, the runners and the participants and the people behind the scenes. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, what was the speedrunning community like at the time? Like, were there leaderboards? How did you all know who was putting up what times for what game and things like that?
There were no leaderboards. Putting runs up on YouTube was not that common in 2009, even though YouTube was a thing in 2009. Really, the majority of the speedrunning community was in Speed Demos Archive. And while not too many people use that site nowadays, it was basically the source for speedrunning back in 2009. Speedruns Live just had like 3 or so races in 2009. So speedrunning races wasn't really much of a thing back then. And speedrun.com just simply did not exist.
It's kind of amazing because I got a chance to talk with Frezzy Man about this. Frezzy Man, first off, I know you were running a ton of games back in those late aughts of the 2000s, but the process you mentioned of how you'd have to submit your run. First of all, tell us where you are in the world, and then how would you submit your speed runs back in those days?
So I am a Swede, so live in Sweden, and when the 2D games were submitted, I think in about the first videos, probably 2004. The first years, it was very common that you were recording your run with an VHS tape or VCR tape in US. So my first run, I think it was Mega Man 3, 2005, and I recorded my first runs with the VHS tape. And I think I was one of the few or first European runners I was shipping one tape at the time to Nathan Yankee in Texas. So it was a post package, and I sent it there, and it was good enough to translate it into get things digital and into the site. So
capture it.
Yeah, just capture it. Andrew, I know, thankfully, we have a lot of your runs because you've recorded them. What made you even think about recording one of your runs early on?
Really, I've always liked the Super Mario Brothers games and Nintendo games in general. So, when I was like, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, I stumbled upon some speedruns and I thought, is it possible to record this? How do you do that? And I just hooked up a VCR and it does work. That's really easy. You just hook up a VCR to a TV and hit record. And so I eventually found my way to Speed Demos Archive after being on Twin Galaxies for a year or so. And I was like, oh, these guys are really cool. This is a dedicated speedrun website, and it was cool to hang that and be able to actually submit my run somewhere.
Mike, if you don't mind, tell us, when did you get involved with SDA, and was there any evolution? Like, how did the site go from, how did they change? How did they start accepting and doing the speedrunning thing as well?
So I got involved in 2004, which was the start of Speed Demos Archive, when they started accepting games outside of Quake. Because originally it was a Quake speedrunning site. And the reason why it was called, and the reason why it has demos in the name, is because of the demo files from Quake that they would use to, to record their records. Because, back in like the late 90s and early 2000s, capture equipment was not common, and it was also expensive, and it was a lot more difficult to do than it is nowadays, where it's pretty easy to do and affordable.
Pretty cool. I know it's interesting because a lot of SDA still exists. The forums and like you can actually start looking back through some of the history of all of this still today. It's kind of interesting.
That was one of the ways I did my research now, to just try to remember everything. Like all these forum topics is still there, so it's great to do some research.
Yeah, when I did my Classic Games Done Quick panel, I had to look at some of the original threads, and they were still there. They were a little difficult to find, but I did find them, and I was able to kind of remember some things that I said and see some things that I had said that I completely did not remember at all. And since you were asking about the evolution of the site of SDA, it's really just like accepting more and more types of runs, and I guess being more flexible in rulings. Like, even though, a lot of the basic stuff of speedruns, like, the any percent, low percent, and 100%, that comes from, SDA. It's called RTA now, but it used to be called single segment when it came to doing runs all in one session. And now with live streaming, that's kind of more expected because, it's not, it's not as entertaining, and it doesn't really flow as well to constantly be saving and loading one segment of a run when you're streaming nowadays, and it doesn't really work that well for a marathon either.
Well, so this is fascinating, and one of the things that we are fortunate enough to have nowadays is this really easy communication platforms. We can share strategies, we can share videos, we can help each other out in a way that who would have thought 10 or 15 or 20 years ago would have even been possible. Andrew, I'm going to throw this one over to you. I know you're primarily known for a lot of Mario games, but you were speedrunning a bunch of games before I even knew speedruns existed. Are these things that you were developing yourselves, or were you able to share any strats or anything with your runs with anybody else, or is this something you were doing on your own?
I mostly, as far as strategy goes, I mostly like they were saying, use the Speed Demos Archive forums, and it's basically you would put up a run, and you would be speedrunning a game, and you'd just make a thread and be like, does anyone speedrun this?
I mean, this is kind of hard to think of nowadays, but because now the biggest community of speedrunners have hundreds or even 1,000 plus runners, but back in the days of SDA, if your run, if the game that you ran had more than one runner, then that was a pretty big game, because usually the speedrunning community is pretty small, and even popular games would only have maybe a couple of runners. So things were much smaller back then. And sometimes people feel like our community is tiny, we only have 5 active runners. I'm like, that's pretty good.
Sometimes you put some threads up and get no response too, and it'd just be like, okay, I guess I'll just figure this out myself.
I can add that it was a big frustration in some games that there was no run for it, and no one was discussing any runs either. So I probably was one of the first did a bounty on some games. So I think, Andrew, did I actually ended up paying you for the werewolf run on NES?
Yeah, we put up a werewolf, the last warrior for NES bounty, for someone to do a speedrun on it, and I just happened to see the game at a game store that I visited, and I was like, oh, I guess I'll try this, and I actually really ended up enjoying the game, and ended up even doing a task of it eventually. It was just funny because It's like, oh, there's a bounty here. This is great.
It's making me chuckle too from saying that you had to find a game at a game store, because I mean, flashcards weren't a thing at this time, I'm assuming, in the mid 2000s.
No.
Right.
If they existed, then they were not commonplace at all, and I don't think they existed back in the late 2000s or early 2010s.
So then I'm curious, Andrew and Frezzy, and Mike, because you were speedrunning at the same time. How would you practice? If would you just have to play the game the whole way through, or is there another way to break the game and make it possible to actually do some practice?
It depended on the game, but I would frequently use an emulator to practice, and which didn't always translate 100% because like emulators back then weren't as accurate, so they wouldn't always correctly emulate the lag and stuff like that. Right. But that did help. If it was like a more modern game with like a saving system, then I would just practice the levels that way. But yeah, there was no like a flashcard practice and right. With all their save states, all their conveniences that really help out for today's runs. And practice ROMs definitely didn't exist back then. The practice ROM was just, if you could emulate it, then great.
And one question there, you had like input lag in your controllers as well when you was practicing, right?
On emulator, probably. I didn't really pay that much attention to it.
Okay.
For me, I hate using emulators just because of the input lag. I've never had a lot of luck with that. So for me, I always basically I would just take a game and be like, how do I get a lot of lives in this game, and then rack up a ton of lives and like go to certain segments and try to get good at certain parts. I did that I remember doing that with Mario too, because there was no way to really practice the later stages without just like putting up a bunch of lives. That was basically the only thing I could think to do.
That's actually not a bad idea. Gotta love the 2005 strats where you had to just live up, get some continues, and go play that level a bunch of times. So that brings up another interesting point. As we're starting to move towards the first live event ever, how many different games were you all? I mean, would you all speedrun a bunch of different games, or did you have games that you were just kind of focusing on in the late 2000s? Around 2009, 2010 time. Mike, I'll start with you. Were you running a lot of games, or?
2009, I think the only game that I ran like 2 games in 2009, and I think it was Sunset Riders and Contra 3.
Nice.
But when it came to classic games done quick, and I can go into more detail later, I ran somewhere around like 10 games for it, and they were just games I had ran throughout the years.
Got it. Okay. And then Frezzy?
It's the same year. I think I found the old schedule for the marathon, and I was attempting 16 runs for the marathon. I think was the plan.
I think you did 15 runs.
15.
You definitely did the most runs.
Yeah, and it's I was not only like running the games I had the record for. I was also doing some casual speed runs for some games. So. Maybe we'll come to that later, but when we were planning the marathon, like many players wanted to see like the popular games, and we didn't have any like the world record holder would not be there. So I said that, hey, I can run that game in this time, and I can run this game in this time, and it ended up that they wanted to see Metroid and Mega Man 2 and other games. So yeah, it was what it was. Like my practice hours before the marathon was not that great in all the games, but yeah, a lot of games.
Andrew,
I remember you pulled an all-nighter practicing all of your games at like in a row or something like that. Like right.
Sorry, I lost you there. What did you say, Mike?
Oh, I remember you pulled an all-nighter, like practicing all of your games in a row.
Like
classic games done quick.
Yeah.
Andrew, how about you?
I did a lot of runs also. I just remember. Yeah, it was kind of like, what games can people run, and other popular games that people are interested in. And I just remember doing like F-Zero and what else did I even do? Marble Madness. And anyway, I did a whole bunch of games, and I remember like I put in a lot of practice in these games, but for the marathon, not all of them went all that well. But it was a lot of fun.
So, Mike, if you wouldn't mind, as we're starting to move towards this very first event, to my understanding, there really hadn't been a place where speedrunners had gotten together, like in real life. That kind of thing hadn't happened. Am I mistaken, or could you at least set the scene a little bit for having an event like this?
You're mostly not mistaken. We had only met once before at MagFest the year previous, at the beginning of 2009. And that's why we originally wanted Classic Games Done Quick to be at MagFest, because, it was a fairly big convention, not as big as it is today, but it was still fairly big back then. We thought they would have the resources to help us pull off an event. But yeah, for the most part, you're right. We've only had one meetup in person before then. It's not commonplace like they are nowadays, whether it's a GDQ or like other smaller events like Midwest Speed Fest and stuff and the like.
Absolutely. And I'm curious how you were able to contact or recruit runners. I'll first ask you, Mike, how you sent out the thing that this was happening. And then I'm curious about how Andrew and Frezzy possibly even heard about this thing to go do some speedruns at.
Well, as mentioned before, everything happened on Speed Demos Archive, so it was just all on the forums. And I remember I had just come back home from vacation, and like a lot of people wanted to do a charity event, but it was very like not focused, and people were just suggesting the games they could run, and like there was no consideration whether they wanted to be in person or like a remote or anything like that. So I decided it needed more focus, and I decided on classic games, hence the name Classic Games Done Quick, mainly because I felt like that was our strong suit at the time. Like we had a lot of good like 8 and 16-bit runners, especially here in the States. So I figured that would be best for our focus. And at the time, I decided we should do it at MagFest because, as I said before, lots of resources we had met there before.
Makes sense. Andrew, I'll start with you. First of all, it sounds like you may have heard about this in the forums, but what made you decide to get involved?
Yeah. So, I saw it on the forums. I saw a few different people suggesting some sort of marathon or meetup. And it seemed like a lot of fun. I mean, I watched all these guys speedruns, and I was like, this would be great to meet these people, and share that hobby. And I was just like, I was really excited to meet everyone and to talk about games with people. And, the fact that it was like, oh, this is like for charity, like, oh, that seems cool. I could do a little traveling, do this and have some fun. And I never thought it would turn into what it is now.
No one did.
Yeah, but no, I talked to a lot of you guys, Freddie, Mike. I talked to a lot of people on the forums, and so it was cool to finally meet a lot of you guys live in person.
And then, Frezzy, man, it kind of blows me away even more that you decided to fly over an ocean just to do a speedrunning event. How did you? What's kind of your story to get you there?
For some years, you are pretty much like living in the forum, or like you watch it too much for your own good and reading the news and all these threads, and you're so much into running these games, and you talk with like many other runners, but you never see their faces. And I think like that the first MagFest week meetup we had, it was. I didn't hesitate to come over like right away, like I'm going. So I think it was a lot of US runners, and it was me from Europe, if I recall correctly. So I just spent some time in Mike's basement, and we were practicing some games. We went to MagFest, and we had a lot of fun there. And I can mention that as well. We had a showcase there for SDA Forum. Like
Yes, we did.
Showed the many runs on a big screen, I think. So it was just great to meet everyone and discuss these games more in depth, so to say. We had a lot in common. So it was a great time.
And what a conversation. There's so many things that like blow me away from that chat. I guess I should first say that was recorded back in November of 2020. And it was for a show that I used to host on Games Done Quick's channel called Games Done Classic, where we looked back at like, you know, some of the classic moments from all of the GDQs. And it was, I can't believe, or I can't even fathom what it was like to run 10 games or to do anything, you know, more. Some runners nowadays still do 2, sometimes even 3 runs. Maybe they're part of a race and all that kind of stuff. And even that, but just the preparation for one really takes a lot of time, effort, hard work, dedication, all of these things, because I don't know how everyone else feels, but it's the kind of thing where you get on that stage, you want to do your best, right? You want to present your game and your speed run the best you possibly can. And a lot of times you may be representing your community because maybe your game hasn't been seen before on that stage or anything like that. So just thinking about that, but then to have to do like 10 games, I can't even imagine. That's one of the things that really sticks with me nowadays. I'm like, wow, what had that been like, you know, trying to prep 10 games? And then the conversation goes on a little longer where you realize that Mike, Andrew, and Freddie didn't really have a lot of time to actually prep all of those properly. So that's why, you know, some of them were a tad rough, if you will. I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of like impressive gaming still to this day. And we've seen, you know, the spectrum of speedrunning is not just any one thing nowadays. Modern games, old games, indie games, games that we might not even thought could have been speedrun are being speedrun nowadays. And I guess that's one of the things I love about digging into the past and digging into the history is like, how did we get to where we are today? One of the themes of Sequence Break since I've been doing it has been to kind of explore the journey and the history of speedrunning. And I don't even think I've really scratched the surface, but, you know, going back and interviewing and getting a chance to chat with some of these folks who are doing it long before it was what it is today has really just been interesting, fascinating, really awesome, and really thankful for these opportunities I get to have to chat with some of these people. So I'm always curious, you know, what's some of your favorite GDQ moments? You know, feel free to share them. Man, I've got so many. I don't even know where to start. If you're watching this year's SGDQ 2023, we already have this whole chef meme that's going on during the whole thing thanks to ADEM's Ratatouille run. So there's always something, right? There's always something. And I've been fortunate to be able to chat with a lot of these folks who have, you know, really made some lasting impressions on a lot of us throughout now the 13-year history of GDQ. So there it is. For better, for worse, for whatever it is, this is a lot of our history is right there on that stage, on the GDQ stage, and pretty cool to kind of just explore it and chat with it. So hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to see, we actually did like 2 hours on this, and we kind of take a deep dive into Frezzy's runs, into Andrew's runs, and even Mike's runs. We look at, I think, Contra, some of the Marios, and I think it was one of the Mega Man X's of Mike's run. I can't remember which one it was now. So anyway, if you'd like to take a whole look, I'm linking to the full episode. All of these interviews that I did for Games Done Quick are located on Games Done Quick's channel. If on the YouTube channel, if you're at all interested, you just search for Games Done Classic on Games Done Quick and you will find them there. And a little bit of a programming announcement. So I think this is going to work out the way we're doing it right now. We're going to keep Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We're going to keep the live stream going for Sequence Break here on RGL TV, Retro Gaming Live TV. So twitch.tv/Retro Gaming Live TV for Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll be doing a live stream. I'm not able to get guests every week, and I have a day job, so sometimes it's a bit challenging. But at this point, I've done 89, we're 85, 86. We're getting close to like 90 episodes plus a ton of shorter episodes. So we'll be resharing some smaller clips and things like that. The stream goes for about an hour to an hour and a half. On these some of these clip days, they'll be a little bit shorter like they are today. So, but if you're around and you want to to watch live, I'll almost always be in the chat and try to give some insight and some, some context to what you're watching and all those kind of things. But I'm really excited to be doing this here on RGL. This is a lot of fun. If you are an RGL fan and you are watching GDQ, Yellsrake and Chess Jerk did an awesome Gauntlet co-op run earlier this morning. Oh my gosh, you need to take a look at it. The commentary is awesome. The gameplay is ridiculous. Wow, did these two work their asses off to get this whole thing? I mean, it is just super impressive. And on top of that, there's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quotes galore during the run. So if that's your jam, let me just highly recommend that one, because I got a chance to watch it live this morning and I had a ton of fun watching it. Otherwise, sequencebreakpodcast.com. That's where all of these episodes are. You can see Frezzy Man. I was fortunate enough to get a chance to chat with him. We did a whole episode with Frezzy Man early on in the podcast, and it's one of my favorite episodes I've done. He's just a real inspiration as far as speedrunning goes, and had a family, went to go do the day job, and hasn't been speedrunning or at least live streaming all that stuff for quite a long time. But I think he's just so instrumental, like Andrew G was and like Mike Uyama has been, to where we are today in speedrunning. So anyway, go check out sequencebreakpodcast.com for everything, all 80 something episodes at this point, and all that good fun jazz. Thanks everyone for watching and hanging out. If you ever have any questions, just go to the website. You can email me or Twitter me or whatever that stuff is. I'm not on a ton of social media, but the Sequence Break podcast is, because so people can actually hear about it and stuff. I don't know. So anyway, thanks for hanging out tonight. Really do appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of GDQ if you're watching. If not, enjoy some retro speedrunning. Let's go watch somebody enjoy them, have a good time. We've got reruns happening right here on Retro Gaming Live TV, so please enjoy. And I will see you next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Bye bye. Adios. Take care. See you later. Thank you.